You should be able to squat more than you can bench, was said by a famous fitness influencer. And I read that on Instagram and said, oh, makes sense. You probably should be able to squat more than you can bench. And then I swiped over to read his explanation, and he said, because the legs are more important than the chest. And I'm scratching my head, what? The legs are more important than the chest? For what? I don't know what that means. I'm not disagreeing. Are they more important for athletics? Are they more important for bodybuilding? Are they more important for doing a bench press? Are they more important for having, I don't know what that means. You'd have to give some more specifics. And people in good shape make these outlandish comments that don't really make any sense and don't mean anything. Because if I disagreed with him, if I said, no, they don't, the chest is more important than the legs, because he said the legs are more important than the chest, if I flipped it, how would you even debate something like that? Red is better than 4. And I'm like, what does that mean? Red is better. Okay, if I said painting, if I wanted to paint this wall, would it be better to paint it with a red or a 4? It's okay, paint it with a red. If I'm plugging something in the calculator, is it easy to plug in 4 or red? 4, okay. So what does it even mean? 4 what? With all that being said, with all these semantics, I do understand his point. What he's saying are the legs are a bigger muscle group, and because of that reason, you can lift more. And that's generally directionally true. We're kind of moving in the correct direction with that. But it's a lot more complicated than that, because although the legs are a bigger muscle group than the chest, although the bench press isn't just your chest, it's your chest, your front delt, and your triceps, nonetheless, the legs are still bigger than your pushing muscles. It matters a lot with leverage, because although the leg press is a squat pattern movement, very similar to the barbell back squat, most people can leg press close to 2 times what they could squat. And they're both squat pattern movements. So why are the legs better in one movement than the legs? It's all about leverage. The weight is relative. You've got 800 pounds on the leg press, and you're not moving it up and down with gravity. You're moving it sideways, and you're in a more stable platform. So to just say, okay, well, this muscle's bigger or more important, whatever that means, as I've mentioned, doesn't mean you should lift more. Sometimes maybe. It depends on the lift. I wouldn't really worry specifically about how much weight you're lifting. I would just worry about, number one, are you training the muscle you're trying to train? If you're doing a bicep workout, are your biceps the muscle that's getting longer and shorter under tension? Is that the muscle that's working, or are you progressing? It doesn't really matter. Maybe you can bench more and you can squat for whatever reason. You've got short arms, long legs, your chest is explosive, you've got a knee. Maybe there are reasons why you might be able to bench more and you can squat. Maybe you just don't like squatting. I don't know. But just being able to bench more isn't inherently bad. Maybe you need to bring up your squat because your bench is so good. Maybe you need to bring up your, you wouldn't be negatively bringing down your bench, but either or, maybe you squat 3 times your bench because you're not a good bencher. It's not an inherently bad thing to be strong on one movement. Another thing in the fitness space that I found mind-boggling, on NBC a couple days ago, on Monday of this week in November 2nd, I believe, NBC said that melatonin has been linked to heart disease. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I take melatonin. Am I going to have heart issues? And it's like, look, these people that are doing these studies, are they stupid? Are they stupid? Are they manipulating people? Are they just ignorant? I don't know. I don't know, because, look, am I saying that it's impossible that melatonin has any correlation and connection and is a driver for heart attacks? I'm not saying that, because you can't disprove a negative. You can't say that something I could never say that there's no dose of melatonin that could ever have negative health consequences. No way. I can't stand up here and say, I know for a fact that melatonin has no correlation. It's not a mechanical mover to get you closer to cancer or heart disease, which I guess you could have heart cancer. What I am saying is this study that NBC talked about with their health experts in scrubs, it's misleading, because the reason why people are taking melatonin is because they can't sleep. If we looked at, okay, people are having heart issues, and these people all have sleep issues, and they all also take melatonin. Which do you think, with no information, without reading the study, do you think that the people that can't sleep, which leads to them taking the melatonin, which of them do you think is more likely to cause heart issues? I would go with only sleeping 3 hours a night. And maybe you want to even take it a step further back. Maybe you say, oh, you're being too simplistic, because the reason people can't sleep is because they're out of shape. Okay, maybe it's because they're out of shape and then they can't sleep, and then being out of sleep leads to them getting heart issues. But also, them being out of shape, leading to them not being able to sleep, leads to them taking melatonin, which is just something that also coincidentally happens while they have heart issues. So you need to kind of step back and look at it. Does this even make sense? Is melatonin symbolic of something else? People taking, there was a study that came out a couple years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, that said that people taking multivitamins are no healthier than people who don't take them. If not, in some studies, this was meta-analysis, in some studies it said that they were actually less healthy. They had a lower life expectancy. And a lot of people look at that, and I saw a massive TED Talk, a 2-hour-long TED Talk, talking about the negatives of the microplastics and XYZ and the sugar and whatever. The saturated fat in the 1 gram of saturated fat and the 2 grams of sugar in the multivitamin, and that's leading to people being less healthy. No! The clear Occam's razor, the most obvious reason for this, and it could be multifaceted. It could be this is 90% of it, this is 10% of it, this is, it could be multiple reasons that are compounding. But the main reason I would look at on why they're not seeing a health benefit or it's potentially negative is because people taking multivitamins are less healthy. They're not eating a healthy diet. They're going to a doctor, and the doctor's like, you don't eat healthy, you need to just do the best you can with these multivitamins. And that would be the most clear-cut rationale for that happening. So I think a lot of people, I'm not saying studies are irrelevant because studies are obviously how we know everything to a degree, but I think you need to really think about it. This says this, you need to attack it from a bunch of different angles to fully understand what's going on. And we've got some, more fitness